In this video, we're going to add pictures to our database and to our web user interface. There's not a whole lot that's going to be new here technically that we're doing, but this will give us the capability to add photos to our database as well, and also to our website. So to start with, let's remember what our schema looks like. We already have plants and specimens. Now we're moving on to photos, where one specimen can have multiple photos. So for photos, we're going to have a primary key. We'll have a foreign key back to specimen, and then we'll have something like a URL, which is the location of the photo on our server, and then we'll have things like who took the photo and when the photo was taken. So pretty straightforward. Because we've seen a lot of these concepts already, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. So start with phpMyAdmin, and for the table, we're going to say a new table called pictures or photos. Photos will be fine. Number of columns, well, let's see. Primary key, foreign key, URL, date taken, and contributor. That's at least 5. And go. Okay. Name, photo, ID. Okay, int is fine default. And let's see, we're going to, just like we've done before, we're going to say not null, primary key, and auto increment. Okay, the others we'll do again fairly quickly. We're going to say specimen ID, that's our foreign key back to the specimen table, and then we're going to say URI, universal resource indicator, a bit more generic than a URL, varchar, and we could say 512 for that, or 511, doesn't matter, 512-ish, that'll be fine. And then we'll say date taken. For simplicity, we'll make that a varchar, and then we'll say contributor, or photographer basically, varchar, and we'll do 255 for each of these, although the date taken could really just be 60, to be honest with you. 60, and then contributor 255 will be fine. Okay, okay, we'll make that 511, that'll work. Okay, now each of the final 4 columns we're going to allow to be nullable, so I'm simply going to tick null, and then I'm going to choose save, which will create our new photos table. Okay, now from the specimen view, we currently have, let's see, let me run to our page here. From the specimen view, we currently have a page where we can add specimens, but I'd like to also make a list of existing specimens that match this plant. If you remember how we got here, we start at the home page, we type red, hit submit, and that'll give us a list of plants rather. I click on a plant, and I still have my breakpoint going, so I'm just going to need to forward this through. There we go. And then that's going to give us an opportunity to add a specimen for this plant. But what we might want to do is throw a table up here that shows us the specimens that belong to this plant. Okay, so a little bit of work we're going to need to do there. Let me go back to Java EE view and Control M. And let's think about our DAO. We have a specimen HBM DAO. What we might want to do is add a new method here that is fetched by plant ID, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and say public list, and then specimen is our DTO. And then we'll say fetch by plant ID, int plant ID. Open curly and close curly. Okay, and let's remember how we've done a similar query in the plant HBM DAO. This is where we're doing a select style query, but remember in Hibernate in HQL, we don't use the word select. I'm going to borrow what we have here in the fetch plants method, and I'm going to move it over to the fetch by plant ID method of the specimen DAO. So we're going to want to get our Hibernate session. That's not going to change. The query is going to change. The results will change. So instead of list plants, we're going to use the generic identifier specimen. Oops. And then we'll call it specimens. and then return specimens. Okay. Okay, so this time we're going to say, remember that we don't need the word select, so from the query we're going to say from the specimens table, or actually that's right, we don't use the table name, we use the DTO name. So from specimen, and then we're going to say, well, let's take a look at what's on our specimen. How do we identify the plant ID? So we look at specimen.java, and we just call it plant ID. So we come back and we're going to say where plant ID like, and then we'll say plant ID. Remember, in Hibernate, instead of using tables and columns, we're using classes and attributes. And now we need to set our parameter. So for the parameter, we're just going to say plant ID in double quotes. That's going to match up against our query statement above. We don't need the like condition here. And so actually I can change this to an equal from a like up here, right? So with just an equal, I don't need the wildcards. So for the second parameter, I'm going to put plant ID. Okay. And let me go ahead and re-enable what I've done down here. Equals collections.checklist, and we're going to say specimen.class. Okay. Probably need to import that. Control-Shift-O, organize imports. Java util collections is correct. And after a few modifications, I think we have what we need here, so I'm going to choose save. Now remember that we are in the implementation, and I can very easily put this in the interface by simply doing refactor and then pull up. And that's going to take this method signature and put it right up in the interface so that I can call it from our service layer. And then from the service layer, I can invoke this from our manage bean layer, our UI layer. Notice at this point we're dealing with the plant ID. That's all we need is the ID because we're doing a fetch by ID. And we're in the persistence layer where a unique identifier or a primary key or a foreign key makes sense. But when I go up one level to the manage bean, we want to deal with objects at that level. So I'm going to run up to our, just a moment. I'm going to run up to our manage bean specimen VO, okay, and Control M. And here what we're going to do is consider how we want to get the specimens out of the plant. Now let's take a look at our plant DTO, and I'm going to click on this, and when we think about it, there's a one-to-many relationship between plant and specimen. So we could easily put a list in our plant DTO, let's say private, list specimen, and then we'll say specimens. Okay, and I will Control 1 and generate getter and setter. 1 second, let me organize imports first. Control-Shift-O, Java util list. Now click on specimen, Control 1. Oops. And create getter and setter. Now what we might do, we might not load the specimens right away when we load a plant. We might do a lazy load, which says, hey, I'm only going to load the specimens when I need them. I'm going to keep the attribute here on the plant, and I'm going to leave it unpopulated until the time at which I decide that I need the specimen. So we go ahead and put our specimens in there, and I'm going to choose save. Now we go back to the specimen VO, and remember how the specimen VO works. On the plant screen where we have the table of plants, we select a plant. When we select a plant, it invokes this setPlant method, okay? And then we invoke the specimen XHTML page. And remember, the specimen XHTML page uses this object graph notation language, or ognal syntax, to pull out the plant and then the common name. We can do a similar thing with specimens to populate our specimens table. Remember how our data table works. So if we take a look at results, And what we see is that we have this value search plants.plants. So this is a data table, but what we're going to do, instead of showing plants, we're going to show the specimens for a plant. So it would be something like specimen vo.plant.specimens. That's what's eventually going to be on our XHTML page or our JSF page. And so it's going to get that by going to plant and then the specimens attribute right here. Okay, so let's go back to our specimen VO. And when we have this setPlant method, let's invoke another method called loadSpecimens. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and enter the method. We generally don't want setter methods to be very heavy, to be honest with you. They should be, anything more than 2 lines is a problem. Really, they should just be 1. So I want to delegate this lazy load to a new method called loadSpecimens. Notice I type the method I want, and then I click on it, and that's going to give me a new method here called loadSpecimens. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, let's see, we have our plant service, right? So let's say plant service.load specimens, and then we'll pass in our plant object. Our plant object is an attribute of the specimen VO. We know it's being set right here. Okay. Now the only trick is this load specimens method does not exist in our plant service. So we need to make that. You see what I've done is I've created the persistence logic in the DAO. I'm writing the UI logic now in the UI layer, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie the two together. So let's see, create method load plants and type iPlant service. Okay, it's kind enough to make the method for us. I can toss some JavaDoc on here and say load specimens for a given plant. Now, notice the return type is void. That's fine, because we're taking this plant object and we're putting the specimens inside of it. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, notice that at this layer, at the UI and at the business logic layer, we're dealing with the object type, where once we get down to the persistence layer, we're dealing with keys, foreign key, primary key, things like that. That's typically how this breakdown goes. Persistence knows about the database or the data store. UI does not know. Business logic does not know. So let's go ahead and implement this method that we've made now. Control M, and I'm going to go to plant service. Notice that plant service right now does not compile, and the reason is I have added a method to the interface iPlant service. That load specimens method we just made. I've added it to the interface. It does not yet exist in the class. So this is an easy fix. Add on implemented methods. Remember, we're still in the business logic layer now. Add on implemented methods, and let's look for this load plants method, or load specimens rather. Here's load specimens. Notice we already have this concept of a specimen DAO. So I'm going to say specimen DAO. And then what did we call it? Fetched by plant ID. Okay, the plant ID, I'm going to say plant.getGUID. That's our unique identifier or our primary key of the plant table, which is also our foreign key in the specimen table. Okay, so let's do a control 1, and that's going to say assign to new local variable, and we're going to call this just specimens. Okay, and there we go, that looks good. And now we're going to say plant.setSpecimens, and we're going to pass in our specimens, and easy as that. With that, now we've wired everything up. At this point, what I would likely do is write a unit test to test all of this out, because I have touched all 3 layers, and it's probably a good idea to start updating my unit test. Also, I probably want to add a few log statements here. So those are a couple things that I might come back and do outside of this video. For the moment, though, I'm going to go back to our results. I'm going to go back to our results XHTML. I'm going to just borrow this data table syntax that I made earlier, and I'm going to paste it into our specimen. So let's see, we'll do it above the form, and I'm going to paste, but I know I need to change a few things. Instead of, let's see, table ID show plants, we're going to change this ID, the unique identifier for this table to show specimens. And I can already tell this is going to get on my nerves if I don't fix it now. So let me do a bit of indentation here to line everything up nicely. Okay, variable, we're going to call it, instead of plant result, specimen result. Remember the difference between a specimen and a plant. A plant is the scientific definition of a plant. A specimen is a physical plant that you can touch. It has things like a location, date it was planted, so on and so forth. Okay, value. Here's where things are going to get interesting. We're going to use this ognal syntax. We already know how to get the plant. Specimen vo.plant. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to borrow that syntax and whoops. Okay, let me try that one more time. We're going to borrow the syntax here. Let me highlight, Control C, but since I'm in the virtual machine, I'm going to right click and copy. I'm not sure if it's going to respect my Control C or not. And value, we're going to say specimen vo.plant.specimens. So you see we're walking that graph from our value object to our plant object to the specimens that we've just specified. Okay, selection mode single, row key. Well, what's the unique identifier for a specimen? Let's remember. The unique identifier for a specimen is simply ID. So row key, we're going to say specimen result .id. What's specimen result? That's our iteration variable. Means every time we walk over this collection, it's going to place the current element of the collection in this variable, and then the row key specimen result.id that says which one did we actually click on. Okay, we're going to leave in our Ajax event, and we're going to say for this one, we're going to say specimen vo.onRowSelect. We have not made that method yet, so we will, but we have not made it yet. So I'll do that. I'll choose save. Okay, now we need to change our columns here. We'll say specimen for the ID. We're going to say specimen result.id. And what else do we have on our specimen that we want to show? Latitude, longitude, and let's say planted by in description. We'll just keep it simple and we'll keep it at that. So specimen result, and I'm going to borrow this. We'll paste it several times so we can reuse it. Okay, and now we're going to say latitude instead of genus. Okay, longitude. And description. Okay, and I'll change the labels as well. Latitude. And this is just what the user's going to see. Longitude. So if I happen to misspell the header text, it's not a big deal. If I misspell the output text, it is a bigger deal. Okay, description. Okay, footer, I don't think we're going to need this facet anymore. I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to save, do a massive build, and redeploy. I've built, redeployed, and I've set a few breakpoints. I also noticed I had a small spelling error. I was missing the R in description. I fixed that. So we go ahead and search on red, and I looked at the database, and in an earlier video we created two specimens for plant ID number 13, latitude, longitude. Notice I didn't actually put the planted by or planted date in our table, but that's easy enough to do. So we're going to remember, take a mental photograph of the latitude and longitude that you see here, and remember it's plant number 13. So I click on plant 13 and my debugger's going to kick now. And okay, this is the plant selection event we've seen before. I'm going to go ahead and play through that. Okay, now this is the set plant on specimen VO, and notice the next thing that we have is this load specimens method. That's the one that we just created. I'm going to step into that. Notice it's passing our plant, the Quercus rubrum, Pleasant Ridge, Red Oak. I'm going to step into one more time, and notice that I am in the plant service now, which is our business logic layer. Remember, in the business logic layer, When we're calling methods, we're going to be dealing with entire objects. It's only when we get to that persistence layer that we get down to IDs. So now we're getting into that persistence layer. I've gone from UI, as you see here, the value object, to business logic. From business logic now, I'm going to jump into persistence logic, and you're going to see that we're in Specimen DAO, specifically the Specimen HBM DAO. And here's the logic that we just wrote on querying all specimens for a plant ID. And again, if you're not using the debugger, you're going to waste a lot of time in this class. So look closely at what I'm doing when I'm using the debugger. This is going to make things a lot easier for me. I can drill down, and sure enough, I see two specimens. I can expand on them. There's our 4455, our Brandon Jones, October 18th. That's one of our specimens. The other specimen, 3924 minus 8450, Brandon Jones, October 19th. So we see that, sure enough, our query does work properly, and we are getting results that we expect from our Hibernate layer. So I'm back up to the service level now. I'm going to go ahead and tell this to resume. Now I set a breakpoint on get specimens within plant to ensure that it is getting called when it renders the table on our JSF, our XHTML page. I go ahead and choose play, and at this point the page should render. And sure enough, we see specimen, Pleasant Ridge Red Oak, and we see our two specimens we already have, plus an opportunity to add a new specimen. This puts us in a good position for our next step, which is the ability to add photos to a specimen. So what we'll do is we will make this selectable so that we can click and we can go to some kind of a photo upload page, or maybe we could even do it on the same page that we have here. But we're going to give that capability to click and add photos. One thing that doesn't work just yet, we could make this work, but it doesn't work just yet. If I were to add a specimen right now, it wouldn't refresh this table. We would need to put in some extra logic to do that. So those are some things that we can look forward to in a future video. I look forward to seeing you then.